All right, there we go. Welcome to another episode of the Keeg Talks. Today is the Keeg Talks Star Trek, the Star Trek universe, the Star Trek franchise. If you guys are out there watching, you're watching us live on twitch.tv/The Keeg Show or youtube.com/The Keeg Show, or you're listening to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from, all the major ones. Looking into Stitcher. We're not on Stitcher yet, but hopefully soon. We'll figure that out. But Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. We are there. I'm your host, Dimithri Perera, and we did this episode with the same group of guests, maybe about 2 years ago. It was 2020. We're talking height of the pandemic. We were here talking about Star Trek, and things were picking up back then. But I got the same guests this time around, and we're going to talk about not only our love of Star Trek, but like what's happening right now, what's happening in the future, where does the franchise go from this point on. So let me introduce my guests. First, we got Gil Baron, I want to say JG, but it's GJ Baron.
GJ Baron.
GJ Baron. How's it going?
It's going great. Excited to talk about my favorite topic, which is Star Trek, as always.
Is Star Trek your number one?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably up there. So I'm a Star Trek, Ghostbusters, Superman. I'd say that's sort of where my nerd stuff lives.
So I knew Superman, and our other guest obviously shares that with you. If you're watching the live stream, you already know who it is, but it's a secret if you're listening to the podcast. But Ghostbusters, like you're a Ghostbusters super fan?
Oh yeah, for sure. Ghostbusters was my first love.
Like Ghostbusters anything?
Yeah, I mean, like I grew up in the era of the cartoon show, of the animated series, so I knew the cartoon before I even knew the movie. And I remember hearing about, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and they were showing Ghostbusters on television, the movie, and I was like, they made a movie of the cartoon?
Yeah.
And so I was completely hooked by the cartoon, and I really loved the recent comic book series by Eric Burnham. That was really amazing, and yeah, so that's I love Ghostbusters.
I was the same way. I grew up with the cartoon before I saw the movie. Mostly because I didn't see much movies when I was a kid. I was always watching TV. And I think that's kind of the point with the cartoon, and like a lot of cartoons of like rated R movies became like kids cartoons, And I think it's like, otherwise how are kids going to know who Conan is without like...
That's true. Or they had the Little Shop of Horrors cartoon, right?
Yeah. Or Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Or RoboCop. Or Toxic Avenger. Those were all cartoons I watched as a kid.
Right. Yeah.
There was a Rambo cartoon. I didn't watch that, but
that's a Rambo cartoon.
Yeah. Let me introduce my second guest for today. We got Star Trek superfan and also Superman superfan. We got Professor Steve Biggs. Steve, welcome back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How have you been?
Okay. Unemployed this semester, but that's all right. So, but other than that, I've been, catching up on stuff like, Star Trek.
There's been a lot.
Yeah. All the genre stuff.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot. There's a lot of Star Trek alone, and then there's a lot of just everything, right?
Yeah. So keeping up with the CW superhero shows, what few remain.
Yeah.
And the Star Wars stuff and the Marvel stuff on Disney Plus.
It's
been a ride.
But I mean, that's kind of what the Keeg is for. It's like, tune in on whatever episode we're talking about, whatever it is that you like,
Yeah. And speaking of things that you found out about the original by watching the TV version, my version of that was MASH.
You saw the sitcom, and then you learned about the movie in the book.
Yeah. And so, can I work my way backwards back to the source material? So
that book is terrible. I just recently read it. It's horrible.
You sure, but when you are 16 or something, it's hilarious, and it's certainly better than like the first book in MASH Goes to Maine and MASH Mania, which were all written by the original author, Richard Hooker, Richard Greenberger.
Oh my God.
They at least have a lot more going on than the tie-in, MASH Goes to Portugal or MASH Goes to Hollywood or MASH Goes to, it's like, oh, yikes.
What? I don't get how this all works. You're saying it was a book series before it was a sitcom?
It was a book before it was a movie, before it was a sitcom.
Right. And the sitcom is kind of based on the movie / the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look that up. That is weird. Weird to know. But MASH goes to, they go to different places?
Yeah, those anyone that has Richard Hooker or Richard Hornberger with somebody, just throw those in the trash. The original Richard Hooker books, though, again, it's been a while since I've read them, but I've got them. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, and the guy's actually, and the guy's real name is Richard Hornberger, but he was an actual doctor at the time, so he wrote them under the Richard Hooker pseudonym.
I mean, I love the TV show. The TV show is for sure a classic. I rewatched it all during the pandemic, so that was amazing.
Yeah. I used it for part of my master's project.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that show.
Yeah.
Sorry. How's my video coming out? Is it choppy? Am I looking weird?
Well, now you just hold it, but before that it was fine.
Okay, cool. What was I gonna say? So for anyone out there who wants to hear what our thoughts were, a couple years back, definitely check that out. I want to talk about, where it's come from, but or where it's, where it's going. Star Trek specifically, not MASH. But I do want to hear about your guys' original experiences with Star Trek. Like, what got you into Star Trek? I know we went over it in the past episode, but again, it's been 2 years. But just a brief reintroduction to you guys being Star Trek fans.
You want to go first, Steven?
I guess, because I probably have the earliest version of this. So when Star Trek was first on TV, it was on Thursday nights. Well, preceding Star Trek to air was Bewitched by a couple of seasons, and that also aired on Thursday nights. So we were a one TV household at the time. So mom and dad wanted to, and actually we did too, because we knew Bewitched. We didn't know what the Star Trek thing was. So I didn't actually catch up to Star Trek until summer reruns. And the first episode I saw was Miri. And we just ate it up. In fact, we went out and, got mud and put it on our faces. And we're like, oh, I've got grup disease. I've got grup disease. So, yeah. But we were hooked. And so I forget, because it wasn't until the third season that they moved it to Friday nights. Or was it Friday at 8 first for the second season? Oh, I can't remember now.
You don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, so we were hooked, and then it moved out of the Bewitched time period, so we were able to watch it first run when it came back in the fall. And yeah, we're just hooked. And then, of course, in the early 70s, local stations started picking it up in syndication, and then you just couldn't get away from it. It was on every day at 5 or 6, depending on what year we're talking about. Later, when it became really popular, it would play 2 times a day, or like once at dinner time and once late night. Again, still being in school at the time, couldn't do that late night one, but the afternoon one was. And of course, there were only 79 original episodes, which if you're running 5 episodes a week, go through that pretty quick. And so at one point, I remember my mom going, haven't you seen this like 4 times already, and it's like, yeah, it's a good one though. At least it's not the Space Hippies episode. And then so for from
remember
1969,
when the animated series started?
that was 70.
Do you remember what your reaction was at that time?
I thought the music was weird, and actually, even though it was a half hour, there were some episodes that I was like, this seems really slow. Of course,
it was really slow. Yeah, I just recently watched it too.
And it was that Filmation animation. So it's hardly animated at all. Just lips moving and eyebrows raising is about it. And so, and then I found out later the behind the scenes on it was they were never in the studio together. They basically recorded. They got sent recording equipment at home, and just basically read their lines. And you can hear it in the lack of performance quality. I think when you become an adult, but even as I think it was in high school or something when it first came out. Even then I was like, I'll watch it because it's Star Trek, but this is just weird. And then of course they did some stuff again to make the animation easier. Like instead of putting on full spacesuits, they had the force field belts. So all they had to do is animate they can use the same animation cells, but then just animate in a glow around them. So that's why they're not dying of, asphyxiation in space or something, because they got the force field belts, little brother. So, I mean, it was okay. It filled, a Star Trek gap, because live action, there was nothing from 69 to 79. And so, you're basically, the only Star Trek you get was the animated series or the Gold Key comics or the Bantam book series that came out.
That actually seems like kind of a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of Star Trek available.
Yeah. The Bantam books were few and far between, though. I mean, I think maybe 2 a year, something like that. So maybe just 1 a year.
Yeah. I got into Star Trek. A friend of mine from elementary school came over one day and was like, what if we watch this? And it was a Next Generation episode, and I had no idea anything about it. But I don't even remember what episode it was, but I completely just fell in love with I think the colors and the pace of it. And at that point as a kid, I think I was 9 or 10 years old, I was really a strictly cartoons person, and this show definitely felt like it fit into still the world of superheroes and cartoon stuff that I liked. The colors were bright, the setting was very clean or whatever. So I think it touched on whatever OCD I had as a kid. Just it's almost like a white noise machine in certain ways, especially early Next Generation. It's very a calming show, and just as I grew older and got more appreciative of story and storytelling, it really grew with me because I was in high school during the last few years of Deep Space Nine, and that, obviously the Dominion War was such an epic storyline, and it was exactly the kind of storytelling I was interested in when I was a teenager. And yeah, it's just, Star Trek is nice because it's sort of grown up with me.
Yeah, I remember when Next Gen came out, one of the criticisms that a friend of mine had was, I just wish it kind of wasn't the Legion of Superheroes. You got the blind guy that can see in different spectrums. You got the girl that can, read people's emotions. You got the genius kid. You got the alien.
I would say it has a lot of similarities to a Justice League show, or really any of those team shows from the 80s, like a Masters of the Universe or a Mask or GoBots or Transformers or whatever. There's a team, and everyone on the team has a role and a very specific personality. And, obviously, it's a 1 hour show, so it's a little more complex than that. But there is a very basic thing about those Next Generation characters where, you've got the angry, aggressive guy, you've got the Lothario guy, you've got, the the motherly doctor, you have the emotional therapist, and everyone kind of has a very like specific, very, I don't want to call it two-dimensional, but if you like just squinted and like only looked at it through a small kind of peephole, you would still get what's going on. It's like the characters are broad enough that you can very clearly get who they are.
Here's an interesting question. The original series was half-hour episodes, right?
Nope, hour.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
Was that
matter of fact
popular
because,
at the time to have hour-long episodes?
Yeah.
Okay.
All TV dramas were an hour long.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Okay. Then never mind.
And actually, because of changes in how many commercials you can have, those original series episodes are 5 minutes or 6 minutes longer than the next gen episodes.
Were they 49 instead of 44?
About 50 minutes. About 51 minutes instead of 45. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. My quick experience with Star Trek is that I was a hater for a long time as a kid because I didn't know. I didn't know any better. And also, like, just in general, I guess the geek journey of being a guy who's a geek, it's something very specific. It's like, yeah, you're a hater, you're a gatekeeper. And then maybe I'm just speaking for myself. I was a hater, I was a gatekeeper for the longest time because it wasn't cool to be a geek. And so everything that I liked was the right way to do things, and everybody else sucks. And I grew out of that, obviously, and like the Keeg is not representative of that, of who I was when I was in high school. But Star Trek was one of those things where it was like Star Wars or Star Trek. You pick a side, And I had picked my side for a long time. I picked Star Wars for a long time, and people made fun of, Trekkies and whatnot. I still remember a "Whose Line Is It Anyway" joke, which was, it's useless like a condom to a Trekkie. I still remember that. That was on Whose Line Is It Anyway. And so, like...
That's fair.
I was a hater for so long, and what I did though was I saw I knew that there was a new Star Trek movie coming out, and it was J.J. Abrams' movies, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch those movies, and I'm going to watch some of the series before I see this movie. And so I watched original series, I watched Next Gen, and then I also watched, because it was on some random channel in syndication, I watched Enterprise before Abrams. And I didn't watch everything, but enough that I got a feel for the characters, and it was still a joke to me to see the first Abrams movie, but I also was interested in seeing the movie. So what I did was I wore a Star Wars shirt to go see it. And so, yes.
Really fucking showed him, Dimithri.
That shows
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
That's like me wearing one of my Superman shirts to a Marvel movie. So, yeah.
Have you done that?
I did the first few movies, yeah.
Steve. But yeah,
I'm born to raise heck.
I gotta be honest though, I did love the Abrams movie. The beginning scene made me cry. Chris Hemsworth, who we were talking about pre-show, Chris Hemsworth, that was the first time I saw him, and he had 5 minutes of screen time, and it made me cry, and I was like, okay.
You did a lot with it.
What's that?
You did a lot with that 5 minutes.
Yeah. So I started to get into it. I bought one of the phasers. I still have it. The kind that looks like the gun, not the kind that looks like a remote control. And I got a phaser. I was looking into getting like a Abrams uniform. Also, they were it was sexy, say what you want about the Abrams movies, but they were young, they were sexy. It was that's who, why not want to be like that?
I mean, the one thing that I think the first movie got a lot of stuff right. The one thing that Abrams got right more than anything is Star Trek is horny as hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Star Trek is super horny. I mean, it's there's a lot of sex and subtext going on in all Star
Trek. Sex, subtext, subsex, subspace sex.
Yeah. Subspace sex. Space sex.
You know, SpaceX is, as people break up, SpaceX sex.
Imzadis, outzadis.
So I mean, and then I just got into it in general, and I watch what I want to watch, and I'm not a hater anymore, like I wasn't, when I was younger.
Good.
And well, I mean, I wouldn't have this episode just to dunk on it, but I've been really exploring like different geek stuff in the last, let's just say 5 years, things that I never gave a shot to, that I'm exploring, and I'm still afraid of becoming a fan of too many things, but I like Star Trek, and I like what they're doing right now, currently. I looked up, by the way, what episode we were last on. It was the Keeg Talks. Well, it's labeled the Keeg Live episode 203, but technically with our renumbering system and rebranding, it's the Keeg Talks episode 703. But it was January 30th, 2021. So it was almost 2 years ago. What has changed in the last 2 years with Star Trek?
We have more shows.
Yeah. we have more shows, and more shows just really kind of knocking it out of the park too. I don't think Lower Decks had premiered then, or maybe it had, but only a couple of episodes. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Lower Decks has been, I think that and Strange New Worlds have been the crown jewels in the new Trek era.
Yeah, it hadn't come out yet. Lower Decks came out August 6, 2020. So this was before we even had heard of Lower Decks, I think.
Yeah.
At that point.
Oh, I thought you said it was 2021.
Oh yeah, you're right. Oh yeah,
so like
you're right.
Season of Lower Decks that already happened.
You're right.
Yeah. So we probably talked about it.
Yeah.
But
I completely agree with Steven. I mean, we have, I think, 5 Star Trek shows on the air right now. And really, Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks are like the crown jewels of all of them. I really take my hat off to Discovery for kicking off this new era, but it's not the best of all the stuff that's going on. And I don't think it has to be. I don't think everything has to be, at a super A level. Not everything can be the best, but really, it really showed, I would say, the limitations of that JJ style storytelling.
Yeah.
Like I like a lot of it. I'm glad that they are where they are. I'm gonna keep watching it. I watch every episode. But one thing that it really showed was that episodic with like a through line story arc throughout the season is really what works best for Star Trek. And I think that both Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds show that. And those shows just are so good and knock it completely out of the park. Right now we're in an era, we're in the space where Prodigy is finishing up their first season, like the second half of their season 1 is airing right now. And this second half of it is so good compared to the first half. I saw someone describe Prodigy recently as a bunch of kids from the Star Wars universe escaping the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's such a good description of it, because I remember watching the first couple episodes and being like, this is just fucking Star Wars Rebels. Like, this is just what it is. Like, it's so Star Wars-y, and like, Star Wars does Star Wars really well. No one needs Star Trek to try and do Star Wars, right?
Right.
And the fact that, like, as the show goes on, it's like, no, we don't want to be in that world. We don't want to be in this crazy world with, crazy warlords and, all the tropes of Star Wars. They want to be in a Star Trek world where there's a utopia and people care about each other and there's a sort of more high-minded ideal, and like I can't think of something that's more of a love letter to Star Trek than that.
Yeah. I agree. I think I think Discovery's gotten better as it's gone along, and it especially got better once they took that jump to the future. And I think way back in the day, way back when Voyager was ending, and I think Enterprise hadn't started yet. There was, remember these BBS boards? there's a Trek BBS.
I remember the Trek BBS. I was there.
Yeah. What's a Trek BBS?
BBS is a bulletin board system. It's there used to be a ton of them. I don't think there are anymore. But it still exists. I still every now and then go to it if I need a question about Trek literature, because I'm a little behind on my Star Trek book series reading.
You read the Coda books?
Oh,
What's
it's
that?
like a forum. It's like a message board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Coda?
Yeah.
I don't think I have.
Those were the books that closed out the Pocket Books universe.
Oh.
What is that?
Okay,
so Pocket Books had the license for, since the movie, basically
since Voyager ended, they've had the license for Star Trek books. So that's 25 some odd years.
No, it goes back even further than that. It goes back to
You're right. They had the license since the 90s. You're right.
Yeah.
But since Voyager ended, they were like, well, we want to keep making these Star Trek books, so why don't we just keep going in our own continuity? Because we have no idea if there's ever going to be another Star Trek show.
Right.
So they started doing things like famously the Deep Space Nine relaunch, which is I think 9 or 10 books. The Voyager relaunch, which brought them back to the Delta Quadrant, the Next Generation relaunch, and then every summer there would be like a crossover series. Like it would be 4 or 5 books that would bring together the crews of Next Generation, Voyager, and Deep Space Nine to have some big giant adventure. And I think there were like 4 or 5 big crossover events. And they're like really good. They're really great. And the thing is that now that Star Trek is back and they're filling in all the backstory of what happened between Nemesis and now, most of those books are now out of continuity, right? Like they were all we had for about 20 years, and now that the TV people want to write over that, like those books aren't in continuity. So Pocket Books decided to do a series, like a 3-book series that closes out that universe. That basically says that, like the J.J. Abrams verse, the Kelvin timeline, this is where the timeline splits. So there's a timeline that is the Pocket universe, the Pocket Books timeline, and there's the in continuity timeline that you see on television now. And by the way, this brings me to what I wanted to talk about, which was the current run of Star Trek comics, but I can save that to whenever you're ready.
Yeah. We'll save that for a little bit, because I mean, there's a couple of interesting points that I do want to bring up throughout the course of this episode. But so there have been 12 series so far, according to, I don't know, what you consider a Star Trek series. The only question mark that I have is, do we consider short treks a Star Trek series?
I don't know. Go ahead.
I think it's part of Discovery. But if somebody wants to call them their own separate series, then they can do that. But I think it's part of Discovery.
Right. It was listed as a series on Paramount Plus, but there's not a consistent thing. I just consider it like a project. Like it was a series of Star Trek shorts. They aren't related to Discovery necessarily. Like they take place all over the Star Trek universe. Right. But I don't know that it's somewhere between just a one-off in a series. I guess it's just sort of a project, and I hope they bring it back. I would love to see more of an anthology that goes into the universe of Star Trek. That would be fun.
So that's what I was going to say. So on the Trek BBS, they were talking, what do you want the next Star Trek show to be? And I said, well, if I was king of Paramount, I'd like to see a show set right after Voyager, because Voyager's coming back to an Alpha Quadrant that they will not recognize.
Right.
Between the Borg and the Dominion War, home ain't home anymore. And even in Deep Space Nine, they talked about, some members of the Federation had already broken off and stuff. And so the show that I would want to see would be something a little bit more political and everything, trying to put the Federation back together again.
Uh-huh.
Well, then Discovery jumps in 1,000 years in the future, and that's what that show's about. And I'm like, I'm happy. I'm finally getting the show that I would have pitched. So, yeah.
Does it make you sad?
One other thing about what?
That
they're doing this. No, because I was never going to be king of Paramount. So as long as somebody else had the bright idea and they're going with it, I'm fine with that.
I really do like the idea that like movie studios run on a king system, on a monarchy system.
Yeah. So, and the other thing about the book series is, and I actually went on because a lot of the authors are on that Trek BBS, and when they started basically retconning some continuity, like in the Pocketbooks universe, Trip Tucker didn't die. His death was faked so he could become an undercover spy for Section 31.
That is great.
And I was like, and I asked him, I go, how did you guys get this past, that's exactly what they said. They're like, well, they're never going to do anything with these shows again. So yeah, you guys have a free hand now. This is all uncharted territory. So Go ahead and chart it. And I was like, yay.
Did they ever return to the Enterprise timeline, like at all in anything? Like in continuity?
Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, Discovery theoretically took place 10 years before Kirk, so it's somewhere between Enterprise and the original series, but nothing that was, that was set in the Enterprise timeline, except for Star Trek Beyond. I don't know if you guys. I mean, that was honestly my favorite of the Kelvin movies.
Uh-huh.
I liked it.
Yeah, I like it a lot because it has really the spirit of Star Trek, and the ship. So much of it is like based in the Enterprise era because they're like finding an old ship from that era, the uniforms of the crew that they find. So that's kind of cool about Star Trek Beyond.
Yeah. They mentioned Admiral Archer's dog, and so it gets mentioned a lot.
That doesn't make sense. The dog thing, because it's like 100 years later, but whatever.
What was the dog? What was the dog thing?
Well, in the JJ movie, the Scotty gets sentenced to that, gets sent to that ice planet because he sent Admiral Archer's dog, or he transported him across the solar system, right?
Uh-huh.
And lost him.
And lost him, but that's Porthos. That's Porthos from Enterprise. Admiral Archer is supposed to be Captain Archer, or it's supposed to be a wink to that, but it doesn't actually make sense because it's 100 years later. So whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, if you dig down deep into those JJ movies, there's a lot in there that doesn't make sense. But
that's true. You can't think about it too hard, but they are fun.
Yeah.
But like in Star Trek continuity, anything can happen. So, like, in the J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline, Captain Archer and his dog could have been stuck on a planet in which he was gifted the Fountain of Youth for him and his dog, and now...
Yes, all that is literally what happens with Zephram Cochrane. That is literally a thing that happens.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happens with Zephram
The inventor of the warp drive?
The inventor of the warp drive, played by... James Cromwell in First Contact. But what they did in that movie, they didn't do that. They used it for a cheap joke. So it's not like they made an effort to be like, oh yeah, he somehow survived 100 years later and is an admiral or whatever. They just used it for a dumb joke and they just kept moving,
Yeah.
So if you want to use it as a springboard for story, you could, but they didn't. So
Right.
And it could have also been Porthos the Sixth.
Right. It could also been,
or Archer the Sixth.
Yeah.
It could have been his son or something.
Yeah.
Right. All of that stuff is possible.
Yeah. But that's the thing about Star Trek. Like, anything could happen. People get stuck in time warps. People have clones. Lower Decks loves to play around with that idea that anything is possible.
And actually, what I love about Lower Decks is because I tried to sell this to a friend of mine who was not a big fan of New Trek and has basically kind of given up on it. And I said, well, have you seen either Lower Decks or Strange New Worlds? Because no, I've given up. And I was like, well, you can't. I'm going to force you. I'm going to force you. And I said, the great thing about Lower Decks is it's a cartoon that makes fun of Star Trek while still being Star Trek.
Yeah.
And so I love their meta dialogue about, story tropes and stuff that, that again, through the years, everyone out here, we've all kind of gone, well, they overuse that a lot, or they, that doesn't make any sense anymore, or, blah, blah, blah. And they'll actually talk about it on Lower Decks and make it a joke and make it we could do like what, they did back when they had the 3 blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh my God, that is such a deep cut.
Yeah.
So.
I love
like
Lower
all the
Decks.
different. Yeah.
Why do we think, and for, I guess, I don't know who's watching this that doesn't already know all this stuff, but, Lower Decks being kind of a parody, but still in continuity and just like an in continuity satire of Star Trek. Why do we think that it was created in the first place? Like, why was this something that Star Trek needed?
Well, okay. So let me, oh boy, you just kicked over one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
Nothing is needed. Nothing is necessary. Absolutely nothing fictional is needed or necessary. So the whole question of why is this needed? Why is this necessary? Well, it's not. It just simply isn't. None of it is. None of it, going back to any fictional character ever written about in the history of literature, is necessary. So let's just put that aside and never mention it again.
I mean, that's a super oversimplification of nothing is ever, I guess that's life then. Nothing is ever needed or necessary.
No, real life is necessary. Fiction is not.
If it's not food and it's not shelter, it's not necessary.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Production, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I guess I've always questioned.
Steve.
Yeah, I've always questioned.
Hold the thought.
Okay.
Only because my connection's been giving me problems, and I thought I could push through with it, and it doesn't. So we're gonna stop this, and we're gonna pick up in a minute or two. So hang tight. I'm gonna restart some systems, and we'll be back on. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, everything.